This is Dave Palumbo with an RxMuscle news update. As you might have heard, Neil Yoda Hill is now going to be working with Big Ramy. We've seen Big Ramy work with many coaches over the years, starting with Dennis James. I think he started with Bader, but Badai originally went to Dennis James, back to Bader. We saw him go to Chris Aceto. We saw him go to George Farah. We saw him go back to Chris Aceto. We saw him go back to Bader. And now it seems as though the 100th coach coming into the picture now is going to be Neil Hill. Now, I was sitting with Neil Hill at the Olympia several weeks ago, and we were talking about different people who could conceivably work with Ramy. And I had asked Neil if he would be interested in working with him if that became available, and he did express interest in that. So I understand after the Olympia, a lot of people were courting Big Ramy. I know Hani Rambod was after him. Matter of fact, there were some pictures on his Instagram that had insinuated that maybe they were working together, but obviously that we had reported here at RxMuscle that was not the case. But I know that Neil Hill was in talks with him, as well as a couple other coaches. I'll tell you one person who didn't contact him, which was Chris Aceto, who has worked with him in the past. I'm sure he would have certainly considered working with him, but I guess Chris didn't want to become a whole part of that arms race. But the bottom line is that I think Neil Hill's record speaks for itself. Obviously, Flex Lewis has been a very successful multi-level champion. William Bonac came from a 212 competitor that no one even saw as a viable threat to anything, and Neil brought him up to almost winning the Olympia, a year ago. So, and then he won the Arnold Classic, of course, earlier in the season. So I think Neil Hill might be a good fit for Big Ramy. I think only for the sheer fact that he doesn't have an overwhelming amount of clients, and he also he takes everything very personally. So I think that some of Ramy's problem might be, his mental state of mind. And I think that Neil might be really good for Ramy in that sense. He'll either make it with Neil or Neil will get rid of him. It depends. If Ramy's coming to work, I think that Neil will do a great job with him. I think if there's other factors that are influencing Ramy not being able to get in shape other than just sheer science knowledge, I think that could be a problem, because I don't think Neil Hill is going to put up with any garbage. But like I said, I don't think Neil would have taken Ramy on if he didn't feel that there was something that he could do well with. Like I said, it seems sometimes not to be a great idea when you keep switching coaches, because no one ever really learns your body. That could be an issue. It's weird that no one has been able to really dial him in. I think Chris Aceto probably came the closest to making him look his best the year he worked with him. I think it was a mistake that Ramy had left him originally, but there was other factors at play. Now, if he can stick with Neil and maybe work with him a couple years and let Neil really get to know his body and tweak fine-tune the things that aren't going to be right, rather than at the first failure run for the hills, I think that could be a success if he doesn't do that. I think this is a long-term project. I think Ramy's physique is interesting because he's so big that people assume he needs a lot more food, and maybe people overestimate certain things because of that. Remember, no one in the history of the IFBB has ever competed as big as Ramy. There's never been a bodybuilder that big. Now, that's not to say that I think Ronnie Coleman was probably bigger. If you think about lean muscle tissue per height, I think him and Ramy are probably the same height, and I think that Ronnie probably at his best at over 290 pounds. Lean on stage was probably was a bigger bodybuilder, but Ramy just proportion-wise looks bigger than everyone else. And I think that just throws off a lot of people. You get bamboozled by all this size he's got, and you're afraid if you don't feed him enough that he's going to disappear. And I just don't think that's the case. And I think, once again, I think Neil Hill will be the kind of guy that won't be afraid to, slam the hammer down if he has to and make Ramy suffer, just like Chris did when Chris worked with him. So it'll be interesting to see what the first show they pick is. Now, I know Neil said he wants to take some time to get used to Ramy's body, which means we're not going to see Ramy at the Arnold Classic, obviously. Will we see another return trip to the New York Pro for Ramy? I don't know. It's been done a lot by him already, very successfully, of course. I think a better plan would probably be put Ramy into a show closer to the Olympia, so that you can kind of go one show and then jump right into the Olympia. But Neil is going to be calling the shots here. I do believe Ramy would have to requalify this year because he didn't place where he needed to be to qualify automatically for the following year. I think it's a good idea that he get back on stage again, especially if he's working with a new coach to kind of test the waters. So once again, the big announcement: Neil Hill now working with Big Ramy. What that means, we'll find out. I know I'm probably going to get Neil Hill on the show to talk to him a little bit about how that whole episode came about. Maybe I'll run into Big Ramy in Dubai next month when RxMuscle comes into town, I should say, for the Dubai Muscle Show. Now that I believe Ramy is living in Dubai, so I might have to go looking for him. I'm going to get my fishing rod, a little bait and tackle box. I'm going to show up at his house about 4:30 in the morning and say, "Come on, Ramy, we're going fishing." I'll get the whole story for you guys. All right, Dave Palumbo with another RxMuscle news update.